So I thought that could just start by paying homage to the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, and taking the three refuges. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami, dhammang saranang gacchami, sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami, dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. So I hope that everybody in Toronto is having a great day. And yeah, things are coming along here. I'm just here at these ruins, and had always been intrigued because sometimes there's almost no leaves here, and it turns out there's this kind of wind that comes over the top of these ruins and kind of blows all the leaves off, and also kind of blows this area in front of these ruins clear. So it's almost like there's this like a kind of cleared space in front leading up to the ruins with no leaves or no plants. Sometimes it looks like somebody has swept the area. It was kind of nice to show up. I showed up yesterday and saw that. And so Lynn had actually asked Lynn if she had any ideas of things that people might like to hear about. And she mentioned a bunch of topics, and one of them was the the protection of the 5 precepts. So I thought that maybe try to just do a few reflections on the 5 precepts, the 8 precepts in general, and see where it goes. So one of the things about the Buddha's teachings is that it's a wisdom tradition. I remember kind of when I first became a Buddhist, I went to kind of Mahayana temple and was lucky to learn many things there. And there was this concept there what they called upaya, or skillful means. And there was this idea that the precepts were kind of laid down as kind of guidelines, I guess you call it. This idea seems to come up at different places, different times in Buddhist history. And basically they were to be used as guidelines and were to be broken when times and places made it skillful to break them. And so this was the kind of doctrine of upaya and skillful means. And in some of the sutras, there were kind of references to the Buddha in his previous lives breaking these precepts. There's a reference to him when he was, I think, on a ship or something, and pirates came, and he actually killed the pirate, the person, the whatever bandit or whatever who was on the ship. And this was seen to be something skillful. So when I first encountered the precepts, there was this kind of attitude towards them of this upaya, that they were things that were kind of malleable. They were things that were guidelines. In the Buddha's teachings, however, the precepts are kind of more black and white. They're basically areas that one doesn't cross at all. And it's kind of one learns to see the precepts as kind of like, if one is going along a highway and there's a guardrail along the highway and there's a cliff next to the highway. So in other words, one doesn't want to fall over the cliff and fall into ruin. Actually, I went to a trip up these nearby mountains the other day, and that's what it was like. There was this kind of highway, and there were these posts along the highway, kind of one post here, one post here. And in Canada, there's often a guardrail, and I think there was a guardrail at certain places, but sometimes there were just these concrete posts, and then there'd be another concrete post, and there'd be a kind of gap in the center. And if you drove your car through the gap in the post, you'd be in big trouble. A person would be in big trouble because the drop was very sheer. So in the same way, when a person looks at these 5 precepts, one of the aspects of the 5 precepts is not the only aspect, is to cultivate an attitude of danger towards breaking them. That these things are a protection, they're a kind of guardrail And there's something that if we break them, we land into kind of severe danger. So one of the interesting things about the breaking of the 5 precepts is that the kind of bad qualities, the bad things that come from them don't all come towards one at one time. They don't all kind of just show up at once. These results kind of slowly, what you call accumulate. The way the Buddha says, it's like a kind of, a person's evil deeds don't appear all at once, like the results, like ready-made milk. It's kind of they follow a person like fire, kind of smoldering under these leaves, and kind of until there's a time that it bursts. And so in history, this is something that we tend to see, especially with people who engage in a lot of evil actions. Kind of at first, when a person starts doing evil things to get quick results, then it seems like those kind of quick results are coming nice and easy, and they're things that aren't going to end. And so it seems to be the case that actually kind of doing evil brings good things. And we can see kind of examples of this many different places. As we look at history, there's many world leaders who came to power, especially through breaking the precept against murdering. There's kind of maybe powerful people, actors or actresses who broke precepts against, fidelity to one's partner. And maybe even that's something that they would have had to do in their career or so, or that might have been a way that things were advanced in their career, at least from some of the rumors that I heard about what Hollywood could be like. And they become very rich and very famous. But the results of these things tend to follow. And sometimes what one doesn't always see is when they all kind of come together, when they all kind of ripen at once. And so this is the kind of interesting thing that one kind of tends to have to experience themselves. There was this sutta in the canon where there's a kind of very wealthy moneylender, and he's very rich and he dies, and the king comes and takes all his money away from the royal treasury because he died without any heirs. And so the king goes to the Buddha and he says, it's amazing, this man was so wealthy. There was, so many cartloads of gold, so many cartloads of silver. I think he even says to say nothing of the other kind of types of coins that there were. But he says his vehicle was like this. It was like a dilapidated carriage. And his kind of clothing was like this. It had all these kind of like rolled up balls on them. And I think his food was very bad too. And the Buddha tells a story about that man's past lives where he says that he at one time was a kind of man who killed his brother's only heir, and he got his brother's fortune. And then a Pacceka Buddha was coming by for alms food, and he ordered his servants to give him some alms food. But when he gave it, he felt regret. He thought, well, I should have given that. That alms food would have been better if I used it for my servants, or or something else, or other people in his house had eaten it. And the Buddha said that the result of that was that when he was born, he couldn't enjoy the sensual pleasures that his life, his wealth would give him. So he got wealth because he gave dana to the Pacceka Buddha. But he couldn't enjoy any sensual pleasure. So he had this kind of dilapidated carriage. He had kind of, really bad clothes, maybe really bad food. And he said as a result of killing his brother's only heir, he was conveying his 7th heirless fortune to the royal treasury. And after that, he said that fellow didn't make any more merit, so he ended up going to a really bad destination. There's also this other interesting story from the canon where there's a bhikkhuni, and she has this kind of amazing story. And basically, she was the perfect wife and really attended upon her husbands. And, in ancient India, the wife was kind of like, almost a total support for her husband. And she fulfilled the role to the T. So at first, she was from a good family. And her first husband, she did everything, helped with the domestic chores. It was basically perfect in doing things according to the Indian tradition. And but despite that, her husband hated her. And at a certain point, he said, I can't stay with her. I know she's doing everything well, but I can't stand to live with her another moment. And I think after that, they tried to give her to another man. And another man, same thing happened. Finally, and by the way, the first person, his parents-in-law were like, oh, we're losing this kind of, goddess who came to our house. And husband was like, I know, but I can't live with her. I think it happened one more time. And then finally, this ascetic comes to the door for alms. And the father's like, look, we'll give you our daughter as your wife if you give up your asceticism. So he does. And he becomes her husband. And I think that family is rich, so he has lots of money. And eventually that ascetic says as well that, I can't live with this woman. I'm leaving. I'm not going to come back. And so he leaves again. And she's feeling very depressed. But eventually she becomes a bhikkhuni. And then she remembers her previous lives, kind of this very interesting story. At one point, I think it was 7 lifetimes ago, she was a very rich goldsmith's son. But that goldsmith, he would go and kind of have affairs with, these various women who are already married, and just kept on doing that. And then I think after he died, he was reborn as maybe a monkey, and the lead monkey of the troop bit off his genitals. And then he was reborn as like a goat, and almost all of his life he was getting castrated, like just kept getting castrated. And then I think the next to last life, he became a woman. So then he was reborn in a situation where he became a wife, so now he's a woman, and there was also a co-wife. But I think he did something to that co-wife. I can't remember exactly what he did. He either did something to get the husband to divorce her, or maybe even did something to have her murdered. And it was as a result of that when this former goldsmith's son was reborn as, in his final birth, as where he eventually became a bhikkhuni, that all this woman's husbands hated her because this man had, in this previous life, she had kind of separated a husband from her competition, this kind of co-wife. So these kind of results can occur in other lives, but they can also kind of occur in this life too. These kind of evil results. We see this with some dictators. It kind of seems at the beginning of their reign that they're kind of invincible, but then eventually people get so angry at them that they go and overthrow them. So we learn to have this kind of attitude when we see this in the world at large. One can also learn, when one pays attention, to see it in one's own life, kind of get the sense that, certain bad things that ripen sometimes if one has done a lot of bad deeds, one sees how those kind of things, one might see how those kind of things ripen. And that's when this kind of, what you might call attitude towards the precepts becomes something that's a little bit more confirmed, when one learns to see the results of karma that come up in one's own life. And sometimes one needs to do this not just as a kind of rational act, like, I did this, step A, and it directly led to step B. But sometimes a person needs to learn to develop kind of an intuition around these things. Kind of come to get a sense, or one can come to get maybe a feeling that, oh, wait a minute, why did this happen? Some of these spontaneous things that kind of come together, one may be able to sometimes get a feeling of where they came from. And it's in that case that one's kind of attitude towards the precepts becomes, I guess, more deeply centered than just book knowledge. One learns to really tend to see them as a guardrail, learn to really tend to see them as these kind of maybe posts, 5 posts next to a cliff, and one doesn't want to go between the posts and go over the mountain. One sees the danger in breaking these precepts. So probably good to just go over these kind of precepts, at least at first. The first one is panatipata veramani. I won't go over the Pali of all of them maybe, but basically means to refrain from killing any living creature. And this means to refrain from killing even bugs, killing even mosquitoes, killing even spiders or ants, things that are considered pests that come into one's house. And so in doing this, one kind of gives this kind of protection to these beings, and one gains a kind of protection in return. And this is one of the interesting things about the precepts, is they're a protection for oneself, but they're also a gift to others. They're a way that kind of other beings, when a person sees somebody they know are keeping the precepts, they feel protected from the kind of bad things that happen when one breaks the precepts. So there's this kind of paradox that kind of, when one refrains from killing these living beings, then in a sense one gets this kind of protection in return. So there's this kind of, when I was staying in Thailand, they have this monastery called Dao, and it's kind of this interesting setup. It's very deep in the jungle, so there's actually not even any villages nearby where monks can go on Pindapat, and you come to the base of this mountain, and all the monks live on top of the monks live on top of the mountain generally on these kind of like wooden platforms in the forest, and then when one comes for dana, one comes down the mountain and gets kind of food at this like sala that's there in the lower portion. And behind all these deans, or around them, there's this kind of large ridge. It's like this national forest that borders on the Burmese border, and it's stunningly beautiful. There's this valley, and it's basically stunning. It's hard to describe without pictures, and it's teeming with wild animals. There was this photo, they set up this motion capture camera, excuse me, and you see this kind of, these photos that got taken. So once you see a wild boar walk by, then you see a monk, the motion capture camera captured him, then you see a tiger. so they're all using the same path. I didn't see any tigers when I was there, but these animals, I guess, come when they don't see the people. So in any event, there was one monk, and he was staying there when nobody else was there, and he went up this ridge. They had these kind of like large mountainous ridges, and he went up the ridge for some reason, maybe to check on fire breaks or something, I can't remember what, and he was talking to the abbot of the monastery on the phone. And as he was talking to him, this baby bear runs out of the woods, and he says, "Oh, Ajahn, look, there's a baby bear here." And then not long after the baby bear comes out, I think the baby bear went rah, and then ran back into the woods. This mother bear comes, and she comes right up to him and stands over him, and he falls down on his back with his hands up like this, and she's kind of growling at him, and the abbot on the phone could hear the growling. And anyways, she just stood there and didn't do anything to this monk. So later on, this story got back to one of the kind of more psychic Ajahns in the Ajahn Chah tradition. And he said, the reason why you didn't get harmed by that mother bear is because you were keeping the precepts. So one of the aspects of the precepts is this kind of mysterious quality. There's this mysterious quality to Kamma. There is this kind of linear quality, like A, B, C, D, like the kind of billiard balls in physics. But there's, I guess what you might call Newtonian physics, but there's also this kind of unexplained quality where various seemingly random things can get pulled together when the time comes for them to ripen in ways that one can't necessarily explain. And so the protection that comes from the precepts, this one about not killing, and all of them in general can be like this. It's kind of not killing also gives one protection in return. It's kind of this subtle protection, but powerful nonetheless. And for a person who engages in killing, what the Buddha says is that leads to the Kamma of a person being short-lived, at the least. If they engage in killing a lot, then it leads, if they engage in killing and it ripens badly for them, they go to hell or the animal realm. But the very least is that they're short-lived. And if they harm beings, then the very least is that whenever they're reborn, they get sick. But this is not necessarily something that's confined to just a future life. It can also occur within this life. So the second of the 5 precepts is not to steal. And this basically means that one doesn't take things that one thinks another person would not allow one to take. So, for example, the actual thing is a dinna dana. Dinna means not given. Is kind of a dinna dana, not given, something that hasn't been given. And so, but things that one thinks the person might be okay with one using, it's okay to use even if they haven't been explicitly given. So, for example, if one is at a kind of hotel and there's a pad set out, you kind of assume that that's okay. Or if one visits one's family and there's soap or something, then one assumes that no problem to use the soap in the bathroom or something, even if it hasn't been officially given. And the protection that one gets from this is that one doesn't experience a loss of one's property. So again, this is a kind of mysterious aspect of the precepts, the mysterious aspect of their protection, that even if one steals, one might not necessarily rationally see how that leads to the loss of one's property, but there's these spontaneous aspects to Kamma where things can unexpectedly happen. Of course, there could be a kind of rational way that could lead to loss of one's property. If one steals and somebody finds one, then, or takes one to court, then one could lose property because of that. But there is also this kind of mysterious aspect. The third one is to maintain kind of fidelity in fidelity in one's relationships. And so this one is interesting because the protection that's supposed to provide is the protection of basically not having kind of rivalry and revenge. So I remember there was, when I went to this monastery in California, they had this book, and it was called The Book of Enlightened Masters. And it was a kind of a tongue-in-cheek title. And they had all these kind of various Western guru figures over the ages. Or maybe not over the ages, recently, maybe 20th century. And one of them, he became a guru, but he started to have inappropriate relationships with his students. And he ended up having a relationship with one fellow's wife. And that fellow actually came and beheaded that guru in a jewelry store. So this is the kind of rivalry and revenge that can happen in this life, but can also happen in other lives. And actually recently, I was, here in Sri Lanka, I was driving with some people, and the people were kind of very friendly and nice, and was riding with a fellow, and he said to me, we have many bad habits, Bhante, but you don't have any bad habits now. And I said, I still have bad habits. and I said, basically, arahants are the ones who are free of their, basically their bad mental habits, more or less, the kind of the, greed, hatred, and delusion that cause them to have rebirth. And he says, yeah, we don't have, but, not bad habits. He ended up saying, I have problems with kame sumichachara. It's kind of basically this third precept, which means maintaining kind of fidelity in one's relationships, not cheating on one's wife, not cheating on one's parents. And he said, well, what can I do? And I said, how can I stop that? And I said, well, one thing is you can reflect that, it's dangerous if one does this kind of thing, because one's partner can get really angry. There's some cases they may even kill their partner. This kind of thing can happen. Or in other cases, one may get divorced and cause a huge trauma to the family. But what I didn't tell him as well is some of these precepts are said to lead to rebirth in the animal realm. And here in Sri Lanka, one of the interesting things you see, there's a lot of dogs. It's kind of, it's not like Canada or Toronto. There's kind of dogs just about everywhere. And these dogs basically free. And kind of they just go wherever they want, more or less. And they kind of sometimes have their own territories. Well, they'll stake their territory out, and they won't let other dogs kind of come into their territory. But there's no, I haven't seen really, well, it's very rare to see a dog leashed anyways. And so sometimes when one is walking around out here, one will sometimes get followed by these dogs. They kind of become very friendly, towards the monks who are walking, and kind of follow you around and then kind of become your friend. And so I kind of became friends with this one female dog, and we kind of walk around together. And remember when I first came here, she was, very friendly, and, she's a good dog friend. And I would see her out by the entrance of the monastery, and there'd be like 7 or, like 5 male dogs hanging around her. It was kind of, I guess these dogs can tell when a dog is ready to be pregnant. And in any event, there was one dog I'd always see around her, so I figured, well, this is her kind of boyfriend dog, or whatever it may be. And but there were so many other male dogs I didn't know. And I was walking with her one day, or walked up one time, and her usual dog friends were there, and a new dog came and kind of stood in the grass, and she went up and sniffed this dog, and that was the end of that. It kind of, I kept on walking. But in any event, these kind of dogs, there's kind of no restraint over their sense faculties, and they don't have any sense of, doesn't seem to have any sense of a partner. And then when this female dog now, she's no longer kind of pregnant, or I don't know, maybe he's getting older after it's been close to a year. I don't see that happening so much anymore. I don't see all these male dogs hanging around her. It's just all gone. All these dogs are gone. She actually gave birth to a puppy, and the father was nowhere to be found. So in other words, when one cultivates this kind of attitude of just basically, if one heedlessly follows one's sense impressions without knowing a proper amount of restraint, without being able to, if one can't restrain oneself in one's relationships to one's wife or husband, then essentially one's I didn't say this to him, but that was the thought that came. One's cultivating this mind of a dog, as a good thing. There's other animals who are, even worse off than dogs. Dogs have it pretty good compared to other animals. But this is the way that that some of these animals behave. Just kind of totally unrestrained. It's kind of totally whatever they see. That kind of not whatever they see, but just following their desires. And so if one can't follow this precept, if one can't keep it, then one is kind of cultivating a mind like this, kind of cultivating a dog mind. Even when one's alive, one may have a kind of human body, but inside the mind, one's kind of becoming like a dog or like a cat or like another animal. And after death, that's what leads one on to these kind of various physical forms. So the fourth one is not to lie. Excuse me. And this precept has its protection as basically if one tells lies, then one can get very bad rumors spread about one. And kind of this is the least thing. But the most, again, is that one goes to the animal realm, one goes to hell. And this can actually happen in ways that are really unusual or, again, interesting if one sees these kind of things oneself. And so in any event, this is the kind of protection of these things. It could kind of seem a little bit in the books like, oh, well, no big deal. Just kind of somebody spreads rumors about you. But actually, people can do a lot of harm to a person if they spread vicious rumors about them. If they spread vicious falsehoods. One can be falsely accused of murder and end up in jail. One can be falsely accused of rape and end up in jail, all these things. If one cultivates the karma for that, then when the karma comes to ripen, this can be the result. So this is what not telling falsehoods protects one from. The interesting thing about this precept is that it's not necessarily something where one has to tell the brutal, honest truth all the time. Like one has to always go up to, for example, if one's wife or one's husband, say, gets a new pair of shoes, and he says to his wife, honey, what do you think about the shoes? It would be a lie to say, your shoes look wonderful. But it wouldn't be a lie if one said, I like the way your tie looks. Even if he then got the wrong impression that one liked his shoes. So there's this interesting story in the canon where there's the Buddhist physician. His name is Jivaka. And he's the chief physician for King Bimbisara, who was a stream enterer. And Jivaka as well, I think, was a stream enterer. I think he may have even become a non-returner at the end. But in any event, Jivaka gets sent by King Bimbisara to go stay with this other king. His name is Chanda Pajota, which means violent Pajota. And he goes to see him, and this king is very sick. So he says, that's why he begged King Bimbisara to send Jivaka to him. And he knows that this king can't get cured unless he drinks ghee. But the king says to him, I hate ghee. Ghee is loathsome. Don't give me any ghee. And he's so violent that probably he'll kill somebody if if he drinks ghee. So then there's this whole long story about how Jivaka basically tricks him into drinking ghee without telling lies. He gets him to drink some drink. I can't even remember. The king might even have asked him if it was ghee, and he kind of wiggles around it but doesn't tell a lie. He gets them to have a horse set up so that he can leave immediately after the king drinks the ghee. Anyways, he finally gets all this done. The king drinks the ghee. He's got this horse. He's very far away. And a man finally catches up with him and tries to convince him to come back to see the king. And he says, no, I'm not going back. And he keeps going to King Bimbisara. And King Bimbisara, when he sees him, he hears what happens. I think I remember he hears what happens, and he says, it's a good thing you left, because that king is violent. He would have had you killed. And then the king, I think eventually his illness subsides, and he's like, oh, okay, now things are okay with me and Jivaka. But it's a good thing. I think he even says this himself. It's a good thing that he left, because I would have had him killed. But in any event, that whole story is this way that Jivaka basically maneuvers this king into drinking the ghee without telling lies, but not necessarily as well without telling this brutal, honest truth. Like, yes, this is ghee, drink it. That might have gotten him killed. So this is a precept where there is this kind of, where one has to use skill in certain situations, not telling a lie, but one can also be skillful in speech. It's not always skillful to tell the complete, brutal, honest truth all the time. There's also ways that one can telegraph hints, ways that one can do these various things to be skillful without lying, without telling a falsehood to somebody. So this was one of the points that got brought up actually in this, when I went to stay at this one monastery, there was this kind of debate that was going on, which was basically that this precept against lying is something that one should sometimes be able to put aside. And one of the examples that got given for this precept against lying was, when the Nazis were going around to each house and asking, do you have Jews in the attic? And so this was set in this kind of article, I think, that somebody wrote, as an example of where it would be more skillful to lie than to tell the truth. And the monk who I was staying with, he's kind of, very skilled in the monastic rules, and also very intelligent. And he really took offense to this. He said, well, that's not a reason to break the precepts. You don't have to tell the brutal truth. He's like, there's a lot of other things you can say which wouldn't be a lie, but which may save both the Jewish people hiding in your house and yourself. And so this is something that one can consider as well, that this precept doesn't necessarily always mean telling the brutal truth, that it can mean telling a part of the truth, or sometimes just not saying anything at all is skillful. So that's the fourth precept, the one against lying. The fifth precept is the one against taking intoxicants. So basically this means alcohol, recreational drugs, these kind of things, things that make the mind kind of diluted, and one kind of is generally taking them for not to cure an ailment, but to have fun, kind of to enjoy and indulge in the heedlessness that comes from them. And interestingly enough, this is the precept that people tend to find the most excuses for breaking. It's kind of, especially if one is not an alcoholic, then one kind of tends to reason to oneself, well, if I take a drink for a social reason, then it should be no problem at all. It shouldn't be anything that has a really bad effect on me. So this is actually the precept which, by the way, is said to lead to madness. That's the least of the bad qualities that happen from breaking this precept. The protection that comes from keeping it is that it doesn't lead to madness. If one is reborn as a human, it leads to madness. It also leads to animal realm or to hell. And so for this one, though, one of the things that one can consider is that these precepts, they're not just always things that occur in isolation. It's kind of like they connect with other karmic actions that one's doing. So I remember kind of years ago, I was living at this Zen temple, and there was this really huge computer monitor from the 1980s. It was it was like a 17-inch monitor, but it probably weighed, it might have weighed 50 pounds or more. It might have weighed 60 pounds or 80 pounds. It was extremely heavy. It was such a big monitor then, and they needed larger components. I don't know if it had steel in it. It was humongous. And at that time, I decided to pick it up on my own. So I went and kind of lifted and picked it up, and I got this really bad back injury. And I went to see a doctor about this back injury. And he said, don't worry, you're 25, or I think I was 25 at that time. He said, it'll heal, and things will get better. And indeed, after a couple of years, I didn't really necessarily notice that back injury in day-to-day life anymore. But one of the interesting things that happened was that I started to have these kind of pains in my chest, kind of like chest pains, kind of, so sometimes I would start to sweat, and, I'd feel this kind of pain in my chest and in my arm, and I was like, what's going on? Am I like having a heart attack, or what's happening? So I would go to the hospital to see what was happening. So I thought maybe I had a problem with my heart, but every time I went, there was kind of nothing wrong. And so finally I went this one time, and there was a doctor and a student doctor, and he did the tests, and I was having this kind of pain in my chest. And he said, there's nothing wrong with your heart, but it might be a problem with your neck. That's what he said. And so over time, I kind of came to think that he was correct, because after doing some kind of stretching and investigating some other medical avenues, people can take this or leave this as they like, but it really seemed that one of the root sources of this kind of pain in my neck and this tension in my neck and pain in my chest was actually this injury that I got kind of on my lower back. And I think that's becoming more recognized now, that the body is kind of joined together in these ways, and kind of when you get an injury, you get these kind of lines of tension. Your kind of fascia in your body tenses up and can pull other parts of your body out of alignment. So in any ways, the precepts are like this. It might not necessarily be the case that one notices that, say, one's becoming an alcoholic, or one's life has become so much worse from taking alcohol, but all of them join together in such a way that it's kind of like the body. If one gets an injury in one part, then it can come out somewhere else. It's like these kind of balloons that children, those kind of like, what do you call it? Not hot air balloons, those balloon animals, like when I was young. They kind of twist up one part, or they'll kind of make one part really thin and another part bulges out. So this can be the way as well that it works with keeping the precepts and the Dhamma behind them. If one breaks one precept, it actually connects with the other precepts in one's life. And sometimes one can have kind of depression, anxiety, all these various mental things, and one might not see that a contributing factor to these things is actually the breaking of these precepts. It's kind of actually, as a whole, it weakens the fabric of one's mind. It weakens one's ability to resist the negative forces that might appear in one's life, and can cloud one's ability to see the way forward in difficult situations. So in many, many ways, these precepts come together. And this is a kind of another very important point about the precepts. And we started this kind of discussion about the precepts with this discussion of kind of skillful means, or that sometimes these precepts are seen as like a cultural holdover, or something that's used for social harmony, or that these are things that one can, using one's own knowledge and intuition, basically find a way to break skillfully. But in the Buddhist teachings, it actually is a bit different. The way that Dhamma works is very complicated. So indeed, there are these areas in our Buddhist practice where sometimes one quality, when taken too far, can be unskillful. But in a proper proportion, it can be skillful. So for example, it can be good to have compassion, but if somebody becomes so compassionate that they give away with their house to somebody they've never met on the street, then that might be too compassionate. It's kind of, too much. It's gone too far, and now they've actually harmed themselves. But with the precepts, this is where we basically trust in the Buddha's knowledge of the workings of Dhamma, that there are these areas. Yes, indeed, it can be skillful to have room to play here, but there's also an area that's like a cliff that we never want to go over. Crossing that line, breaking that precept, is always unskillful. And so we protect it for the sake of our life, because these things function in mysterious ways. The precepts are things that when we keep them, they come together in ways that are mysterious, not just in terms of restraint or in terms of rules, but they lay a foundation for the growth of our Buddhist practice. And in other ways, they actually are our Buddhist practice. They require us to develop mindfulness, to observe the situations where we're going to break them. They require us to develop restraint. And all these are qualities that feed directly into our meditation practice, feed directly into our self-discipline. These are things that feed directly into the happiness of our mind. Keeping these precepts is something that leads to happiness. When we don't keep them, that fabric weakens. We lose, in a sense, our self-restraint. We lose, in a sense, that protection, and the fabric of our mind becomes weaker as a result. And it's not just that. There's also these very kind of unexplainable ways in which not keeping the precepts can be a danger, but also unexplainable ways in which they can be something that brings great benefit, that brings great happiness. So I remember when I was a young man, in high school, I started to kind of get depressed. It was kind of when I started to feel kind of a little bit depressed, and went to see, I think, a psychologist, and was not feeling good. But outwardly, I mean, I was kind of, I went to the parties and, had the, strong group of friends and all these things that people might want, even towards my last year. All these, all the things that people might want in high school. I felt like I was doing okay with that. But inwardly kind of got quite depressed. I remember when we first came to Buddhism and kind of, eventually learned about the precepts, learned about meditation. And later on, looking back at that period, one of the reflections that I had was, I was unhappy then, but I was not keeping the precepts. Almost none of them. And so obviously unhappiness is going to be the result of that. And kind of not necessarily in the small ways that one takes one drink, one tells one lie, one kills one spider. It won't necessarily lead to unhappiness, but in the aggregate, these things come together and form a kind of karmic net, I guess you could say, that can pull one's life down. But still remember, after I came to Buddhism and started keeping these precepts, that even though my life got much more simple, even though I was no longer going to parties, even though by keeping the precepts, say one might not be able to get a promotion at a ruthless company, it might be very difficult to be a Hollywood movie star, or whatever it might be, if these kind of professions or situations that people love that give short-term results require breaking the precepts, what they'll lead to for a person is unhappiness. They'll lead to a person to have unhappiness in their life now and unhappiness in their lives after they pass away. So that's one of the things that actually ended up saying to these kind of teenagers. I got invited to give a talk at a Dana one time, and there was a couple teenagers, and they were kind of not interested, I don't think, so much in Buddhism. And what I ended up saying was, the thought that popped up was, when you look at these people everybody wants to be, these famous singers, famous actors, sometimes famous politicians, and you look at them at the height of their power when they're breaking the precepts and seeming to get all these sensual pleasures, that's one thing. But when you see them after, you wait 10 years afterwards, a lot of the people who break these precepts, say famous actors or actresses, they don't end up in that good situation. Some of them become addicted to drugs to try to cover up their breaches of the precepts. This is especially the case, I think, even with soldiers. A lot of them can become addicted to alcohol to try to cover up, mask this kind of mental pain that happens. And so this is the kind of longer term result of breaking the precepts. And so that was something that they got. That was something that they understood. So the protection of these precepts occurs in all these different ways, occurs in many ways. It's kind of, it's like a guardrail that stops one from going over the cliff. It protects one from the kind of these mysterious results of karma, or kind of come together and weaken the fabric of one's mind, make one unhappy even when external things seem to be going great. Hard to tie that to this habit of drinking, a few sips or whatever. But this is the way it works, similar to injuring one part of one's body and feeling the pain somewhere else. It protects one in other ways as well, because when one keeps the precepts, then one actually develops this kind of inclination towards things that are good. It gives one this foundation in one's mind. One is free from remorse. One doesn't have to worry about the bad things that happen. And this is worry so much about doing bad things. This is kind of another way that these precepts bring protection, is that in building this foundation and building this inclination, one's mind more naturally tends to lean towards the things in life that will make one happy. And it becomes more of a natural inclination of one's mind. So the Buddha gives a simile of a tree that's pushed by the wind to the point where it leans in one direction. And then whichever way the wind blows when it's time for that tree to fall, the tree falls in the direction that it's leaning. And there's a similar way when a person keeps the precepts their whole life, they lean towards what's wholesome. And they lean towards what's good. And so even then in their life they're leaning towards this. They gain these good things, but at the time of death they tend to fall in the direction they've been leaning, tend to fall in this direction of goodness and go to a good place. So this is also a protection. In this life and in the next life, the precepts lead to good things. But one of the other types of protection too, maybe covered under the first one we discussed, with kind of the mysterious aspects, is that one is giving this kind of gift to living beings. When somebody knows that a person is keeping the precepts, they feel protected in interacting with them. They feel at ease in interacting with them. And this is a kind of gift that a person gives in one's relationships with others, not just human beings, but animals also. When one keeps the 5 precepts, one saves these beings from harm. And so this is what the Buddha, one of maybe the striking features that the Buddha may have seen, that even one can sense in seeing religious figures to this day, is that when one sees, say, like a Christian brother or so, or sees a Hindu priest, or sees something like this, in general, people with this religious garb, that's an emblem that they're keeping precepts. I mean, they vary slightly from religion to religion, but that they're generally keeping these kind of areas of restraint where they don't want to harm other beings. And just seeing that can be something that sets beings' minds at ease, sets the minds at ease of the people one interacts with, sets the mind at ease of even the animals one interacts with. But one doesn't have to have a robe to gain this type of protection. It can be a kind of feeling that one gets when one's around people who keep the precepts strongly, that there's this feeling of safety to them. And when one gives this safety to others, one gets this safety back in return. So in all these ways, the precepts provide a protection. They provide a physical protection for us. They provide a protection against dangers in these mysterious ways. They provide a mental protection for us, and they protect us against inclining to these sometimes very subtle ways of thinking, ways of acting that lead us to harm, lead us to misery. But perhaps the most important aspect of their protection, which didn't really have so much time, and that's the whole Buddhist teaching, is that they incline one's mind, they lead one onwards. They serve as a foundation for our Buddhist practice. They serve as a foundation for us to develop meditation. They serve as a foundation for us to develop dana and to develop the qualities that the Buddha said we should develop for the sake of finding the end of suffering. Because this is one of the things that the Buddha said about protection, is that basically in samsara, so long as one is reborn, so long as one is attached to what's impermanent, there's no safety in that. There's kind of danger in that. But the true permanent safety is one finds a release from what's impermanent, when one finds something that's permanent, and that's nibbana. And the foundation for this quest, the support for this quest, you might say the hiking boots, the water, the all the various kind of equipment that one might need to set out on a dangerous trek to keep one safe, these are the precepts. They serve as our safety in crossing the jungle. They serve as our safety in crossing the flood. And they serve as our safety, as our protection in finding the island. And this island is nibbana. As if one goes to this island and stands on firm ground, then one has found the ultimate protection, the ultimate safety, which is freedom from suffering, cessation, dispassion, nibbana. Okay? So leave that for reflection. And hope that everybody in Toronto has a great day, enjoying the sunny summer weather, and wishing you all the best till next time.